Welcome to People Places Planet Pod, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to ensure a healthy environment, prosperous economies, and vibrant communities founded on the rule of law.
ELI has partnered with Sidley Austin LLP to launch a new podcast series entitled The Enforcement Angle. Throughout this year-long series, our goal is to discuss state and federal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations with senior enforcement officials and thought leaders on environmental enforcement in the United States and globally. The host of today's podcast is Heather Palmer. Heather is an environmental and energy partner in Sidley's Houston, Texas office and a global co-leader of Sidley's environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, practice. On today's episode, Heather speaks with Toby Baker, Executive Director of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, referred to in shorthand as TCEQ. For over 60 years, TCEQ and its predecessor agencies have been a national and global leader on a wide range of environmental issues, from air quality to water quality to remediation. Thanks, Heather, for joining us today. I'm excited for this conversation.
Thanks, Dominic. How are you doing today, Toby?
Heather, I'm doing great.
Before we talk shop, I'd like the audience to learn a little bit about you, where you grew up, family, pets, favorite sports teams, or anything else you want to share.
Sure. So I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas, and I think it had really kind of it really created a need to serve in this area from a young age. My dad worked in refineries, and on my mom's side of the family, we had a working cattle ranch. And so, I sort of grew up doing what I do now, but as a child, my dad was, insulating refineries all across North America, based out of Beaumont. And then I spent a lot of time out sort of on the edge of the Texas Hill Country, working with livestock, but also just getting to enjoy and the outdoors and learning to appreciate what that brings. So from an early age, I was pretty interested in the idea of what things like petrochemical plants and refineries do for the economy and for the citizens of Texas. But at the same time, back then you could smell those refineries in my front yard in Beaumont. You arguably can't smell them like you used to when I was growing up. And so that was always something that stuck with me. And then on the cattle side, I really got an interesting perspective because, we hiked and swam and hunted and fished out there. But then also we were making money off the cattle, or I guess trying to make money off the cattle. So, you kind of get this interesting view of you could really enjoy the land and the water, and at the same time, it could be productive for you economically. So those are, some foundational things that I think drove the way I view things now. So grew up in Beaumont and then early moved to the Central Texas Hill Country, Center Point, Texas, where I lived on the Guadalupe River. I literally lived on the river in a log cabin. I had to be evacuated due to floods, and then moved on to New Braunfels after that, where there are two rivers that flow through New Braunfels, Guadalupe and the Comal. My grandparents lived on the South Llano River outside of Junction, and so I developed this really deep love of Texas rivers, and we still have the place on the South Llano River. We spend a lot of time out there, but there's something for me that is really special about the vast network of rivers that run through the state of Texas, especially when you get out to semi-arid areas like Junction, where you have it's really the hill country starting to butt up against the desert, and yet you have this spring-fed river running right through the middle of it. It's an incredible place to be, and so that has also been deeply part of this job at TCEQ, which is interesting. And so anyway, I've had all these experiences that sort of outside of work that have really influenced how I view work. I'm married. I have 2 kids, a dog, and 8 chickens. Currently reside in Austin, Texas. I think you asked about my favorite sports team. I do have to say my favorite sports team was the Houston Oilers, who no longer exist, which is a travesty for the United States. And so that's that they were. I've never been able to reconnect with an NFL team since they were moved to Tennessee. So anyway, Heather, hopefully that answered your question.
No, that was great. I know the audience really loves to, learn about the background and sort of the personal side of the folks who join us on our podcast. And, for those who are not as familiar with your career, can you walk us through your professional path that, led you to becoming the executive director of the TCEQ?
I was sort of torn between what I would call almost like a counseling for youth job path and an environmental job path. I did a National Outdoor Leadership School course after I graduated from Texas A&M, and I had worked around youth in some form or fashion sort of all through my time at A&M. And so I took a job right after that with the Boys and Girls Club and was their wilderness director, and it culminated in taking a bunch of what I would call pretty rough kids on a backcountry trip through Big Bend, a multi-day canoe trip through Big Bend, and learned that probably should have had better insurance in place when I did that. And so, always wanted to introduce other people to the outdoors, but also wanted to lead people. And at that time, it was really focused on, the next generation. And then I ended up going back to grad school, and the first few weeks of grad school, September the 11th happened. I thought I was going to go back and work on nonprofit type issues. And I was at the George Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. At that time, a number of the professors had worked at the CIA or FBI. Many of them were sort of on loan and still involved in government work. And so I got, when September the 11th happened, everything shifted. Everything I thought I was going to study was sort of thrown out the window just by the nature of the school and the deep roots that President Bush had in government and foreign affairs. And so I got, whether I liked it or not, our whole focus really became September the 11th and how government failed in that, in preparing for September the 11th and in responding to it. And so we spent a lot of time talking about government efficiency and government agencies talking to each other. And when I left the Bush School, went to work for a state senator, and the state senator was Craig Estes, and his district had the Barnett Shale in it. And back then, the Barnett Shale was probably the hottest natural gas play in the world. And it was creating some incredible policy challenges where you had people's backyards butting right up against natural gas wells. And, there was this new technology, or some called it new, of hydraulic fracturing that was allowing them to go into these wells and, do lateral drilling and pull out an incredible amount of gas. And at that time, gas was priced much differently than it is today. And so the Barnett Shale was just, it was sort of a madhouse at the time. And so I was sort of I was thrown into the middle of that policy, those policy discussions, and it looked a lot different than the Permian Basin, and I kind of alluded to it, but you had natural gas wells literally in people's backyards, inside city limits, right outside of baseball, kids' baseball fields, and trying to figure out how to balance that in a way that was safe for the public, yet allow those companies to go in and explore and get that resource was a real challenge at the time. There were a lot of concerns about water use, about the impact on air quality, just safety issues. Senator Estes was vice chair of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, so we were also pretty involved, at the committee level. And so I just fell in love with the policy side of things. Creating good policy has really been my goal my entire career. And so I worked on that for Senator Estes, and then through that, worked closely with the governor's office on a number of things, and had the opportunity to leave Chairman Estes's office and go to work for Governor Perry as his environment, energy, natural resource, and agriculture advisor. And so under my purview were the budgets of the Railroad Commission, the General Land Office, the TCEQ, Parks and Wildlife, the Railroad Commission, the Department of Ag, and the Animal Health Commission. And so I got to work in this really great place where I saw the crossroads of all of those different agencies, because they're all related in some way when you start talking about energy and environment. And it was just fascinating and exciting. And, if you've ever been around Rick Perry, you work all hours. You get calls or emails at 10 o'clock at night. You get calls or emails at 7 in the morning on Thanksgiving. It was high pressure, but a lot of fun. And he really would let, these young advisors kind of, just not run free, but he gave us a lot of autonomy for our age and a lot of trust. And so it was this really fantastic place to work where he would push you hard, but he expected really high quality work. But as long as you were doing it, he would kind of cut you loose and let you go do it. And so I did that for a number of years and got to work on some really incredible things. When he decided to try to get out of the ethanol mandate, that was that was very early in my tenure there. And the next thing I knew, I was flying on jets to DC. I was at the National Press Club. I was providing him all of his talking points, and because that was really in my wheelhouse. And so very quickly learned about, what I would call, you have sort of state and local policies, but very quickly I got thrown into the national policy discussion, and then also the accompanying politics that go with things like that. And so I worked with him for a number of years, and then a commission role came available at TCEQ, and the governor asked me to go out there. So he appointed me to be a commissioner at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I've been working on their budget at that point for, starting in the Senate, quite a long time. I knew the agency, almost as well as you could from the outside. And then, it takes a long time to really learn the agency. You really need to go inside. And so he trusted me at a young age, which I will always give him credit for, to go out there and take that role. And I did that. And in the midst of that, he asked me to oversee the BP, the dollars associated with the BP oil spill or the Macondo blowout. And so I still am a governor's appointee on the Ecosystem Restoration Council, and which has been a huge part of my job, especially as a commissioner. And then our executive director at TCEQ retired, and I'm sitting over on the commission side, and the commission side's pretty interesting. And but you look across the hall and you just see kind of there's just constant action over on the executive director side, and it reminded me a lot more of what I was used to in working for the governor's office. And there was always sort of a longing of, gosh, I wish I was kind of in the middle of that. And did some soul searching and got some necessary clearances from downtown that it would be okay, and decided to put my my resume in to go through the interview process to be executive director of the TCEQ. And so my fellow commissioners, when I did that, then were put in the very awkward place of interviewing me to be the executive director, along with a number of other applicants. And luckily I got the job, and now I've been there for coming up on 3 years, and it's by far the most fun, stressful, challenging, exciting, terrifying job I've ever had in my life. but I wouldn't trade it for the world at this point. It's really an interesting place to be on a daily basis.
No, you've had quite an interesting journey. And, when you talk about sort of shifting from being a TCEQ commissioner to the executive director, I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners are curious, is, how has, your role been different, if at all, as the executive director versus when you were a commissioner?
Sure. The commission role is really interesting. At the end of the day, the commission is a full-time commission, so it's different than a number of state agencies. So as a commissioner at TCEQ, you go to work every day. And the reason why you do that is you have a bi-weekly agenda, which is where you take up all of the actions that the commission has to make decisions on. The commission really is almost like a panel of judges. And so it's very much like a courtroom, in the sense that you spend a lot of time reviewing the record, you spend a lot of time reviewing the facts of cases, looking at evidence, and then at the end of the day, what you're getting paid for as a commissioner is to take the vote, take the hard vote on what's in front of you. And that could be anything from an air permit, that could be a contested case hearing, that could be a new rule package, that could be an enforcement action, an emergency order. All of those big, high-level policy decisions are actually made at the commission level, and it's incredibly rewarding. But it's very much, like I said, like being sort of like a judge or an attorney, and you're not necessarily an attorney with the action of arguing in a courtroom, unless you disagree with one of your fellow commissioners in public, and then it gets real interesting. Because all of that's on the record and everybody gets to watch you have that discussion. But it's a lot of behind the scenes preparation, a lot of reading, a lot of really weighing the facts of things. And then you're also the face of the agency. So you do a lot of speaking engagements. You're out and about quite a bit. If you've ever been to TCEQ, the commissioner's offices are on literally one side of a hallway. And then you go through this little hallway, and then you're on the executive director side. And I used to sit over there, and during things like Hurricane Harvey, there are just people going everywhere, phone calls, people up there 24 hours a day, working out of a, makeshift operation center. And they were dealing with things like the West fertilizer explosion, the, Hurricane Harvey, the hurricane and the tropical storm and everything that came with that. Dealing with huge water issues in big cities like Corpus Christi, the Ebola virus, and you're sitting over there kind of going, man, that looks exciting. The reality is that as a commissioner, you're always sort of 2 or 3 steps behind what's happening on the ground because of ex parte laws and open meetings laws. You're getting briefed one at a time by the ED or the executive director, because you're not allowed to discuss agency business with another commissioner in the room unless it's public. And so, Hurricane Harvey's going on, and you're not finding out about things until 2 to 3 hours later when it's your turn to get briefed. And that was always challenging for me, because my nature is really wanting to get in the middle of things. And also, as a commissioner, you're pretty limited in maybe some of the day-to-day things you can change at the agency, because you're one of 3. If you want to make it, really change something, you got to go out and you've got to have a, public meeting about it and have an open discussion about it. And, I like to tinker, and I'm never comfortable just sort of sitting still. And so I've stepped over to the ED side where, I really get to push the buttons and pull the levers, so to speak. So now I'm the one that's sort of sitting, in that chair when things are happening, like hurricanes or once in history winter storms, or COVID, global pandemics, and learning, figuring out how to move a almost 3,000 person agency to teleworking in under a week. So it's been exactly what I was looking for, which is really the ability to get my hands dirty and affect things on a day-to-day basis. and really step into that role. I'm just more suited for that. But it's a really it's a rewarding place to be.
So what do you see as your mission as the executive director?
There's a few things. I mean, one's the mission of the agency, upholding that and making sure that we're staying true to that, which is essentially, making sure that the economy and the environment are being protected. And I think that those two actually go hand in hand. I don't think it's an either or. I think that when the economy's doing well, companies are more apt to take those steps to go the extra mile with environmental policies. The second is just to lead well. I always have been a student of leadership, and I want to set the example for every staff member at TCEQ, and this goes to something that's written on the side of the Bush School of Government and Public Service. George Bush said, public service is a calling, and I fully believe that, and I think that this job provides the ability to treat it as a calling and get the rewards that come with that really go kind of beyond what you could get in the private sector with, through monetary means. And then finally, to tell the story of the agency. We've been so sort of behind the times with how we do social media and how we tell our story, and because of that, we've sort of let certain groups and the press define who we are, and those definitions of us are never accurate, and it's very frustrating for me. And so I've really taken on the role of trying to better tell the story of the agency and who we are through social media means, through being more proactive with the press, and through being more responsive to some of the things that are put out there that are just false, and then finally through being more transparent. We've really tried to figure out where does it make sense to try to pull the curtain back a little bit on a big regulatory agency and try to be as transparent as we can.
And we have a new presidential administration. And so I'm wondering, how do you see TCEQ's relationship changing with EPA in the new Biden administration, if at all? But do you see anything perhaps changing?
I'll be honest, the biggest change in an administration change is honestly just the changing of the people. And it's because you spend so much time trying to get to know these new appointees and sort of what their personalities are and what they sort of the way they view the world, and then try to adjust and work with them to get things done. And then every time there's an administration change, you sort of go back to square one with a whole host of people who are presidential appointees at the highest level of not just EPA, but every agency. I deal with it through the Ecosystem Restoration Council. We work with EPA, and this is one of those places where the press would paint an inaccurate picture of our relationship with EPA. Yes, there are definitely going to be places where we're going to disagree on certain policies. And the EPA may roll out a new rule that we disagree with, and we'll make comments to that. And it may even result in a lawsuit. But that's literally less than 5% of what we're doing with the EPA on a daily basis. We are working hand in hand with EPA on a whole host of issues on any given day. And we're actually good partners for most of those things. And so, in those staff, there are full-time, lifetime staff at EPA that we've worked with for years, and they're not appointees, and they will still be there, and we'll continue to work with them. So, the biggest change is trying to get to know the new people, first of all, and then second of all is, we really try to be as upfront and open with, our new federal partners as we can, and that's really something we're trying to embrace with this new administration. And, we've already been trying to work to get a meeting with the new administrator to introduce ourselves and say, I have not had the opportunity to do that yet, but say, here's who we are. Here's my cell number. And I know we're not going to agree on everything, but, we're going to be partners on a lot of things. And so let's use each other as we can to advance some of this stuff where we agree. And, fair warning, we may not agree on all of it. And so don't be surprised or offended by that. It just is the way that it is. I don't see it changing a lot. And, there's also this inaccurate depiction that we only disagree, because, we have a Republican governor and the president's Democrat, that we only disagree with, Democratic administrations. And that's completely false. We've disagreed with the Trump administration. We disagreed with the Bush administration. We will always take the path that probably says that Texas needs to be in more control than the federal government, because we know better than people in Washington, D.C. We don't believe a one-size-fits-all approach is probably the correct path forward. The Northeast states are completely different than what we're dealing with, because every single one of them could fit inside of the size of Texas, and so they're butting right up against each other. And so what happens in one state absolutely affects their neighbors. And, Texas is a little different in the sense that we've got a foreign country to our south and, wide open states, to our north and west. And so, and then just a completely different sort of environment to our east, where you start getting, a lot more wet. We'd love to have those conversations about how they affect us on the front end before you go down that path. So we can have a full conversation as to whether what makes sense for Rhode Island makes sense for the state of Texas.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. One of the things that you referenced earlier related to the pandemic, COVID-19 has impacted everyone, either personally, or professionally. How has the TCEQ adjusted enforcement, if at all, in light of COVID-19? Has there been any sort of, adjustment or, understanding, based on the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic and there are all kinds of challenges resulting from that?
First was, going to a teleworking scenario was internally trying to figure out how to, our investigators still needed to go into the field. And so there was an understanding from the very beginning that they were still going to have to do that. And so we just changed some internal policies, not letting investigators ride together in agency vehicles to go do those sorts of things. So we had to do stuff like that. But then also we ran up against, private industry didn't necessarily want strangers, who hadn't been tested, who could possibly be positive, come onto their sites. At the end of the day, there's not a whole lot we can do about that, because it's really up to them. We were about to roll out a more aggressive investigation scheme where we were going to do some risk-based investigations on some big facilities. And the week that we went into telework was our scheduled first in-depth investigation that we were going to do on a facility, a large petrochemical facility, and we had to cancel it. And so we haven't been able to do that. And so those are the big ones. And then, we had put we've been very transparent in granting enforcement discretion because of COVID-19. We didn't really know what to expect at all. So we created a way for companies to ask for enforcement discretion, but we decided to post all of that publicly. So if a company was going to ask for enforcement discretion from the executive director, that was going to be posted on our website for the whole world to see. And I think it's worked very well for us. When you have contractors who are positive with COVID, you can't get them on site, then that makes it almost impossible for a private entity to stay, to stay in compliance on certain things. And so we had to figure out a way to be able to work around things like that. I will tell you that we are very close to rolling that back. The number of enforcement discretion requests we've gotten with regards to COVID-19 has dropped dramatically. We're really not seeing anything at all at this point.
Texas also, experienced severe cold weather and, widespread power outages recently. How did TCEQ enforcement adjust in light of the severe cold weather events?
Well, I think that, so the governor issued a rule suspension related to emission events. That's going to be a tool that's going to cover a lot of the issues that we saw with the storm, especially on big petrochemical facilities. Many of those facilities were I think, asked to shut down and trying to shed load to keep the lights on. And so that rule suspension should cover them, and any that then went down because of the storm specifically should be covered under that. We always have the ability to use enforcement discretion inside the agency, and so we'll be, we will be exploring that. But the biggest thing that came out of it for us, there really weren't big enforcement cases, but one of the things for us that was a game changer, and I think is going to be really illuminating when it's all put together into a report, is, we had almost every major refinery and petrochemical plant down at the same time in the state of Texas, from Corpus all the way to the Louisiana border. And we've never, ever had a shutdown event like this broad, this large, all at one time. Not even Hurricane Harvey got close to this. And so we decided very early in the storm, I think, the Friday of the storm, as soon as the roads cleared, I deployed our mobile monitoring vans, or our investigators with handheld monitors. We deployed our mobile monitoring vans. We got all of our stationary monitors up and running, and we requested the EPA to fly their Aspect aircraft. EPA flew the aircraft for at least 2 weeks. And just last week, we finally ended our handheld and mobile monitoring routes. And so we're going to have data. We're going to have ground level data for in Corpus, Houston, and the Beaumont-Port Arthur area throughout this entire startup event. Probably the largest startup event in the history of the world. And we're going, I'll just tell you preliminarily, we did not see anything at the ground level that would be of concern. And as you know, when these big plants start up, they tend to have higher emissions as they're warming up and they're starting, as the systems are kind of coming online and trying to destroy those emissions. It really, it works better when it's hot. And so as they were heating up, we have those emissions events, and we really have not seen anything at the ground level that would be of concern. And I don't know if there's ever been a more heavily monitored place in the world for an entire month like we did since the storm. So we're going to be packaging all of that into some sort of report, and we'll be able to, through our STEERS database, we'll be able to line up, big emissions events with what we are seeing across these regions on the ground. And I think it's going to be a really interesting report once it's all put together.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I don't think people realize, what you were just talking about in terms of, having the massive shutdowns that we had in the state and the difficulty in starting everything back up and focus on emissions. So I'm sure people will find that very enlightening. Shifting a little bit, beyond the pandemic and the severe weather events, and sort of looking forward, to, hopefully maybe calmer seas ahead. What are the TCEQ's enforcement priorities in general for 2021 and beyond?
We have we have an ongoing enforcement initiative that really started before the pandemic. As you probably know, we had some high profile events that we had to respond to: ITC tank fire, the TPC facility, and it created some challenges, I think, for us and for the public at large who are having to deal with it, and for industry, for the industry players who who were playing by the book and not having issues, you have a big ITC tank fire, it gives a black eye to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're in good standing or not. And so the legislature, the last biennium, gave us additional money to get additional mobile monitors. We decided to build off of that, and we took some internal dollars and we upgraded our handheld monitors across the state. And now we can speciate for benzene specifically. We're putting a program in place where we can try to get that data uploaded almost real time from those handheld monitors. And then we also used internal dollars to add 3 new auto GCs around the Houston ship channel. We also added some additional monitors out in the Midland Odessa region, and then we shifted some monitors in the San Antonio region to get them closer to some of the quarries and APOs that are out in that area that people are concerned about. And so really trying to up our ability to get data. We also took a review of our penalty policy, and we just changed our penalty policy. And for the first time since the beginning of the penalty policy, we've changed how we can count the number of events, which is I think going to be a game changer as we see certain players come through the door on a more regular basis. It'll allow us to adjust those penalties up as we need to. And inside that penalty policy, we got rid of some things like the 20% deferral for entities that had an automatic referral to the Attorney General's office. And then we're also going to be looking at more of a risk-based enhancement as well, but we won't be doing that probably until this fall. We're also currently rewriting our compliance history rules, and which will allow us to account for entities like ITC who have a large event. Right now, they can still be considered satisfactory through our compliance history rules, and there's no way to sort of put them in a penalty box. And so we are in the process of doing that right now, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that rule to proposal sometime in June, which will allow us to just bring common sense to the compliance history discussion. I think you and I could both agree that certain entities after large events shouldn't still be considered satisfactory after those events. And so this is really going to try to address those one-offs that we have to deal with in our compliance history rules. As I alluded to earlier, hopefully at some point we will be able to do these more in-depth investigations that we were trying to do right before we went to a teleworking footprint because of COVID. And that's really going to be a risk-based formula that would take some of our senior investigators and actually put them on the ground in some of these big facilities with different things like OGIC cameras and being able to look, on the ground at these and doing some deeper investigations that frankly the agency hasn't done in a while, and I'd like to bring something like that back. And then finally, we've added drones to our fleet as well, so we can now get drones up and above sites, which we've never been able to do before. So they have cameras, and the ultimate goal is to be able to outfit them at some point with little tools that would help us, identify pollutants and emission points and things like that. But right now, really just getting everyone certified on how to fly those things is important. But we're really trying to bring every tool we have to the table.
I wanted to turn our focus to maybe some sort of more kind of issue specific questions. Climate change, was very much an issue in the recent election. It's definitely been a focus area, one of the primary focus areas of the new Biden administration. What role do you see, if any, of climate change affecting the TCEQ's enforcement priorities?
I would say there's a disconnect between what the public thinks we can do and what we actually can do with things like the topic of climate change. The first thing is we do regulate greenhouse gases right now. You're required to get a permit for greenhouse gases. So that's number one. So we do have some authority there. Now, to go beyond that, we don't have much. And that's where the disconnect lies. To do that, we don't have a bunch of climatologists on our staff. We don't have we don't have those sorts of scientists. We have some meteorologists, But out there sort of creating policy on this is really not our role as a regulatory body. We really enforce what the legislature tells us to. If the federal government decides to, there's been many iterations of trying to wrestle with the climate change topic, and starting with the Waxman-Markey bill years ago, which was going to create a cap and trade system, and then that failed. And then there was the Clean Power Plan that came along that, in our estimation, was a little bit of an overreach for a federal regulatory agency to undertake, especially when it tried to regulate things outside the fence line. And so your guess is as good as mine as far as what we're going to be doing with regards to climate change. So far, the federal government has now, I guess, is on their third iteration of some large policy, whether it be rule or bill related to this, and not one of them has been successful yet. When one becomes successful, then we will, as the delegated entity and the delegated authority in the state of Texas, then we will be compelled by law to go and implement that federal rule or that federal law. So at this point, we don't have the authority to go out on our own and do that sort of stuff. But if the federal government or the Texas legislature decides that we should, then we will go do that.
Another topic or another focus that has really been discussed with the new Biden administration is environmental justice. What are TCEQ's thoughts on environmental justice and the role, if any, that environmental justice considerations play in TCEQ decision making?
The environmental justice discussion is real. If you look at these big events that we've had along the Houston Ship Channel or down in the Beaumont, Port Arthur area, Port Neches, there is a real anxiety that comes with living in some of those areas when you have these big facilities next door. Nobody can deny that, especially when there's a plume that's been hanging over your city for almost a week and over your neighborhood. My goal as the executive director of TCEQ is to provide the same level of protection, the same level of trust, the same level of transparency to every Texan, no matter their socioeconomic status or where they live. In a perfect world, I would love to have people of every neighborhood feel as safe as the people in the other neighborhoods, across town. We have so much heavy industry in along our Gulf Coast that every community deserves to be protected and addressed. We've tried to do that. One of the ways that we've really tried to do that is through our monitoring. If you go to the Houston area, it's probably one of the most heavily monitored regions in the entire world. And by, at least trying to get 3 new auto GCs up online around the ship channel that provides really as close to real-time data as you can get that's been, checked for quality. That is something that I wanted to do. The legislature giving us 3 mobile monitoring vans. So after hurricanes, we used them this past year for hurricanes. We deployed them in neighborhoods all through Port Arthur as those plants were coming back online, so we could track that air quality real time and try to interface with the public. We were putting all of that up, better using our social media tools, so we can trying to be as transparent as we possibly can with that data as we were getting it, and making sure that we were still following the protocols, in the state of Texas that say, disaster response is really supposed to be driven by the local entity. So the county judge is be sort of the chief operating officer in responding to disasters. So making sure that we're still going through the county judge's office and incident command, but at the same time trying to be as transparent as possible and using every tool that we have.
Since its founding, TCEQ has been a leader in remediation. And, one recent area of public attention and press attention and, regulatory attention throughout the United States and now with the Biden administration also going to be a major focus of EPA has been on, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which are referred to as PFAS. Can you share TCEQ's thoughts on addressing PFAS? Are there any potential actions that are under consideration, whether it's any sort of groundwater levels or soil cleanup levels? What can you tell me about kind of what TCEQ is thinking with respect to these emerging contaminants?
We plan on being fully engaged with the EPA on this discussion as it moves forward. I think we can all expect that this is going to be a huge area of attention for the new administration inside the EPA, and my goal would be to be as involved with that as we possibly could. I think we currently have standards in place for 16 different iterations of PFAS, and those are really focused on our, as you mentioned, our remediation program and cleanup levels. We are currently looking at updating those right now. So our chief toxicologist, Dr. Honeycutt, is leading that process, and we haven't gotten that far into it, but we are looking at what would it mean to update those and try to see if we're still keeping up with levels that we would deem as protective. The challenge with these, as you know, is there are many, many different ones out there, and so the question is, where does it make sense and to spend the money on these sorts of on these emerging issues, and how do you do that with big water systems across the country? But yes, my goal is that we would be deeply involved with the new EPA on this, because I expect that it's going to be an ongoing topic of discussion. I would say it really ramped up about 3 years ago when Ken Wagner was still at EPA. We had multiple conversations about trying to lay the groundwork to move something forward with regards to PFAS. So my plan is to be as involved as we possibly can as the new EPA moves it, and then also to internally look at what we already have and make sure that it still makes sense and that it doesn't need to be updated.
I really appreciate your time today, and but to sort of finish us off, I wanted to kind of talk about public service, and you've had a remarkable career in public service, and it was so interesting to hear about your background and how you came to be where you are today. And you're talking about looking to increase salaries so that you can maintain the talent that you have within the agency. Unfortunately, when you look at the polls, it indicates that some of the younger generation continue to have a declining interest in serving in government service. How would you encourage those looking to serve at TCEQ, EPA, or other environmental agencies? How do you encourage them? What advice would you have for folks that are interested in public service?
Well, the first thing is that I would say it's incredibly rewarding, and I think that part of the, I'm going to get philosophical for a second, but one of the challenges that I see just facing society in general is people sort of searching for meaning and searching for things that are rewarding. You could argue that a lot of the anger you see on Facebook and all these other places is linked to the fact that people don't have something deeper grounding them and driving them. There's something to be said for getting involved with public service that goes beyond oneself, and it's exciting to be involved in addressing things that are meaningful now, but they're also things that are going to be meaningful 50 years from now. So the PFAS discussion is a perfect one to look at. The Clean Air Act, the absolute, it's a game changer. These things that go well beyond my lifetime, your lifetime, I think can bring rewards that you never really imagined. Now to be fair, you're probably not going to be able to have your you may not have your shack, your mountain house in Vail, or your your ranch out in West Texas, if you choose this life, but it's going to pay in other ways that I think go far beyond those other things. And then the other thing is, this is really getting to the Facebook anger that I see all the time, is, put your money where your mouth is. It's one thing to retweet somebody who's, bashing something. It's one thing to share something on Facebook that you might have come across, and all of a sudden you're a warrior for that thing that you prove it to me. Come and get in the trenches and see what it's really like, and make a real change, and then we can start talking. And so and then finally, I'd say, if you want to be where the action is, this is what you need to do. If you want to be where the policy is being written, where it's being developed, where the discussions are being had, where the debates are being had, if you want to be in the middle of it, and you want to I think especially young attorneys who are looking for jobs, you could go work for a big firm. And I'm not bashing big firm life, but you could go work for a big firm for a number of years and try to work towards being a partner. But if you came to work at TCEQ or Attorney General's office, this year you could be in a courtroom, working some of the biggest cases in the world, and you're not even partner status at this point, and so if you want the action, then we've got it for you. So you're not going to get paid a lot, but but it certainly will be exciting and fun. So that's I would throw those three things out there. We have jobs available right now, and you send in your resume. I'll take a look at it.
Well, thank you so much for providing some of your scarce time to our listeners. I know everyone really appreciates it, and we really have enjoyed, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your participation.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to People, Places, Planet Pod, brought to you by the Environmental Law Institute. We would like to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and ideas to podcast@eli.org. And if you're interested in learning more about our work, attending one of our events, reading our publications, or becoming a member, please visit our website at www.eli.org.